Okay, perfect. Hello, everyone, and welcome to our webinar. So this is our fourth webinar related to one of our continuing education courses, Rethinking Generalization with the R.E.A.L model, created by Brenda Terzich-Garland and R.E.A.L. In our most recent webinars, Brenda presented how the R.E.A.L model can be used in a broader sense. And she talked about the importance of embracing vulnerability in the midst of chaos and in the generality of parent training skills. But today's webinar is a Q&A. So usually we would do a brief Q&A at the end of the webinars, but we wanted this one to be just a Q&A so that we can create discussions around topics and questions that you all are interested in related to the R.E.A.L model and generalization. So we have Brenda here today to answer your questions. Brenda is the CEO and co-founder of Applied Behavior Consultants, and she's also the creator of the R.E.A.L model and author of the book, The R.E.A.L Model, Rethinking Generalization. We also have Madi here to co-facilitate. Madi is the Chief Clinical Officer at Applied Behavior Consultants, where she's worked closely with Brenda for over 16 years. And depending on time, and if we get a lot of questions, the presenters may not be able to answer all of them. If yours was not answered, or you thought of a question after the webinar, you can email realmodel@appliedbehavior.com. Brenda and Madi encourage you to reach out to them there.
To just know from the participants what trainings they attended. So in other words, were you able to do both of the embracing vulnerability, parts 1 and 2, the Q&A or the interview questions that were done about the R.E.A.L model itself? And then that'll give me an idea about what I can show first to prompt some questions. It's a lot of material, and it's more difficult to narrow it down in terms of its use. So the question and answers should be around if you've had any portion of the R.E.A.L model with respect to the levels of generalization. How would you find that useful as a practitioner when you're training staff, anywhere from RBT tutor implementers to working with parents? The R.E.A.L model is the governing behavioral framework that informs you how to look at behavior change, whether it's the child that you're working with, the tutor that you're training to work with the child, or the parents that you're training to be able to generalize into the natural environment. And one of the other things that typically comes up is when you are training an implementer, a lot of times when we look at level 3, which is teaching for generalization across settings and time, and teaching in the natural environment, for a lot of tutors, they see that as being the same, and actually they're quite different. So there's a lot of questions about that. There's also several questions about what's really the difference between levels 4 and 5. So moving from teaching into the natural environment to establishing social control and mainly social competence, and adapting to the various types of social contingencies. So that's one aspect. When it comes to the parents, and because one of the things we don't want to do, we want to use the R.E.A.L model as a way to connect with the parents and have them be part of the process of change for their child, especially during times when we're not doing structured teaching. And a lot of times when a parent, and you'd think it was the opposite, but when a parent sees that their child is acquisitioning, learning to vocalize for the first time, engaging in self-help and self-care skills that they had, self-help or play skills that they hadn't seen them do before, they get excited. But then at the same time, it makes them feel like, what did they do wrong as a parent? And I can't work with my child because I can't do it like that. And so we have a responsibility as practitioners to be able to make that connection with parents so that they are part of what their child is learning, as well as them being able to be reminded on an ongoing basis, look, someday ABA treatment's not going to be here. And you will be able to engage with your child. you will be able to maintain many of the skills that the child has learned. It doesn't really matter the degree to which they are involved with the diagnosis. It just changes the way that what they'll focus on. So in other words, we all know about training from when we look at early learners, intermediate learners, advanced, and what we call ILS learners, where they have to learn more functionally. No matter their functioning level, it doesn't change the parent's involvement with their child, because they still have the parent-child relationship. And remember, coming from the perspective of vulnerability, autism creates lifelong stress. So it's chronic, but it goes up and down for the parents, because again, they're always going to be that child's parent, independent of what they learn, what they don't learn in ABA treatment. So we want to make sure that the connection to their child is at the best ability of what the child can gain from that, but more important, that we shape the child's repertoire in such a way that they are part of the family, not outside the family. And we've heard from many parents that the statement, and this should resonate with you, oh my gosh, I finally have my child back. I can take them out in the community. I can take them to family events. He even enjoys engaging in different types of social activities. And these are things that the parents never had before. But if we get too arrogant in our treatment and we separate the family or the parents from the treatment, where they're a byproduct of it and not really part of the process, then we don't really increase the quality of their life in such a way that the number of positive interactions that they have with their child or with their family as a whole doesn't increase. And for those of you who've been in the field for a long time, you'll see how that may vary from one child to the next, or one family to the next. So you might want to think about questions around, one of the things that in chapter 2, I start off with the assessment, and I talk about case conceptualization, and that you have to have an understanding of how that child functions without intervention, in order, and also to find out from the parents, what are they wanting out of the intervention, or where they're hoping. And it doesn't even matter. One of the first questions I ask is, I'll say, well, what do you know about applied behavior analysis? And there's not a whole lot that they're told. So that's your opportunity to really embrace their vulnerability and describe to them what they're going to get from it. And in chapter 3 of I think it's chapter 3 and 4, I talk about assessment quite a bit, but that's an opportunity to really get the parents on board and show them how programming starts from the very beginning with respect to the real matrices, when we look at the home matrix and the individual child matrix. So anyway, that's my intro to that. See if that launches anything for you. And then for some of you who want to focus more on the parent training piece and how to use the R.E.A.L model, we can talk about that with respect to the generality inventories. And then last, if you want to talk about the approachable inventory, where it's a guide for you to help the parents make their life more approachable, have a family life that's approachable for the child, because it's a lot to take on, especially for practitioners who might be providing the service in the home. Their whole life turns upside down, and they really have a hard time shifting. But then once they make the shift, what's even more difficult is transitioning from ABA service and saying, okay, your child, we're done with services, your child's made their goals, and it's time to transition. And that's a huge piece, and can bring up a lot of fear and vulnerability for the parents, because they're saying to themselves, oh my gosh, what am I going to do without the support? We got so used to this, and my child's really thriving. I don't feel like I have the ability to do it. So there's aspects of both those trainings that touch on those types of vulnerabilities that parents would experience.
And you have a few questions that have come in, Brenda. You touched on this a little bit already, but what advice do you have for practitioners and explaining the real model to parents to get their buy-in. That's one. And then the second, kind of related, is how do you balance getting a parent involved from early on with the need to build trust with them so they're open with you? So maybe cultural or religious variables or other barriers. So they're kind of related, but maybe you can answer those two together.
Okay. A lot of times we speak in a jargon that really separates us from the parent. So what you want to be able to do is, it's very important. It doesn't matter what you're going to show them or what you're going to teach them or how their child could really, really benefit from ABA services. You need to get the connection with the parent. And one of the things Monty and I have been working on a series that introduces aspects of what really goes on in the family unit. And the book that we've been really diving into is Autism and the Family. And, you know, even for as much as you may think that you know about how the actual disorder affects the family, she really dives in deep with respect to how parents feel when they're being spoken to and it's not even just us as practitioners, behavior analyst practitioners. It's with doctors, it's with any professional that they're having to work with, and especially when the child is first being diagnosed. And you'd think that if there were parents, if their child was on the high function end, they actually have a really hard time getting a diagnosis. And they're frequently told, well, he doesn't have autism, he's going to be fine, he's going to talk. And then on the more severe side, well, you know, he can't even tie his shoes or brush his teeth or get dressed. You know, how is ABA going to help them? And doctors and other types of peer professionals aren't really trained, along with behavior analysts, to work with that vulnerability with parents. So the very first thing that parents want to be asked is, what can you tell me about your child that I need to know? What has been your experience in working with other professionals? What have you noticed that your child needs help with? And they're probably going to be shocked because they've never been asked that question. Now, you do have to guide that a bit, because a lot of times, especially if the child has severe behavior problems, they're really caught up in that whole negative interaction. Because there's two things going on, and this is where the vulnerability really comes into place. First of all, the child's having behavior problems because what they've been trained on how to work with or be with their child from a typical parenting perspective isn't working. And we know that typical parents, we've been trained in a society that you punish and reinforce, and you mainly punish kids for what they call bad behavior. And even though we don't like it and we try to stay away from those terms, the reality of it is that's the perspective that they come from. So if you then also ask them, you know, what have you been told about how you deal with your child's noncompliance? What have you been told on how to deal with your child's tantruming? And when he aggresses, how does that make you feel? Where are you in that picture? And so Monty had an opportunity to interview some parents and some siblings. And one of the things I really want to point out when it comes to connecting with the family, if the child has siblings, you need to ask about the siblings. And you also want to say, hey, I'd really like to talk to them about their child, about their brother or sister that has autism, and how that's impacting them, and how they understand that. And so she had a chance to interview a sibling of an adult child now with autism who grew up with it. There was a lot of difficulty in that family situation as he was growing up, but he was able to really reflect back on that and let us know what he wanted to know or should have known growing up. And one of the things that he was not asked is, how is this making you feel? How can I be helpful? So he acted out instead. And now he is the guardian in case something happens to the parents, and his whole perspective has changed. So I think as behavior analysts, we kind of failed in that direction. It's not enough to just get the kid to play with the child with autism. We really need to inquire about how it's affecting the siblings in the actual household. And then last, what because this is really important. We would do this as behaviors. We don't want to just know when the kid is acting out. Well, when is he not acting out? What's he doing when he's not acting out? So you want to ask the parent the same thing. When do you have positive interactions with your child? What do you like about your child? How does the family as a unit engage with the child? You want to know those things. And Steve Hayes would refer to that as case conceptualization or case formulation, because you're trying to figure out how ABA intervention can impact the whole of the child's life, and not just one aspect of what we're doing in structured teaching. The second question is that because parents, and a lot of tutors too, but a lot of us are visual people, and when you look at the intensity of what we train, that's a lot to take on. And I even had behavior consultants and higher level positions work with me, and they said they had to spend a month training themselves to hear what I'm saying because it was just so much information. So if I've got professionals who are trained in the field, who have a master's degree, who are BCBA certified, and they're having a hard time listening to me and all of what is involved in ABA treatment, then you can't even imagine what a parent might be going through. So oftentimes, if you can just narrow it down, so here's my demonstration of this. I'm going to share my screen. I just have to get it for you here. So this is something I came up with training new staff. So these are the matrices. And if you said to a parent and you showed them a sample matrices of just their child's life at home, this is what it would consist of. It would consist of a morning routine with communication, after school play, things that happen again after school besides just playing, but they have to do their homework. They've got to do a number of self-care skills. And then along with that, you're going to have a morning routine, but then, an evening routine. And if you look at, and so this isn't even all of it, this is just the home matrix where they're saying this is kind of a representation of your life. Of course, it's going to be different from one household to the next. But then how do you take all this that we're going to probe to see where the child actually has the ability to do these things independently, and what areas they don't have to do these things independently, the skills, all the communication, because we have to break it down. We have to say, well, it's not enough to just say to the parent, well, he doesn't know how to get dressed. And the parent's going, yeah, I already know that. But why can't he get dressed? And this is where we get into concept training, where we want to work on concept formation. But again, you're taking all this, and you as a practitioner have to break it down and say, well, this is what programming actually is going to look like if we were to break it down into specific lesson intervention procedures. So we're going to have a number of skills that fall under, this is for an early learner, under unstructured play. And when we look at the basic lessons that we typically teach them, imitation, man, social reciprocity, and even though it's a social skill, it's still a beginning social behavior that's required at a very, very, very early age. And to some aspect, even when we're having the child greet the tutor when they come onto the center, or they're at home and they have to greet the parents, the parents are wanting that back and forth acknowledgement that they're even present. So then we have a number of skills that are related to teaching that are taught concurrently in order to really see, can the child engage in appropriate play skills during unstructured teaching time. So if you're able to show the parent, these are some of the areas that we're going to address. All kids are going to have a number of skills, concepts that they're acquisition on, communication, verbal operants that are related to unstructured play. Because at some point, not all play is structured. Now, there's play where they're going to learn certain rules, but we as practitioners are not going to be structuring the environment so that they respond to those aspects of play that are necessary. And then all kids have to learn how to be listeners, because we live in a society where we are rule governed and we have to follow rules. They're going to go from the home environment into an educational environment, and they're going to be the listeners. And then all kids have social skills and play that they do with other kids. So a lot of times, if you can use these are visual aids I use for my staff in my company, along with the matrices, that helps a lot to explain initially what we're focusing on. All right, so what I like to do when it comes to the levels of generalization is I like to use this particular chart, which I introduced in both the Embracing Vulnerability series, to explain to the parent, now, here's, if you see to the right of this, all right, so you kind of have to navigate here. This, if you can capture the levels of generalization on one piece of paper, along with the child's matrices, it's a lot easier for parents to digest, and they're able to see the benefit of why they need to be involved, and that it's important not just for us to provide the structured training to address all the deficits and X's that we've identified in the assessment, along with the child's operant learning level in regards to self-care, communication, and play. But here, because I broke this down to more simple terms, you say during this process, because it's important that you are part of the process, we're going to be doing parent training with you to teach you how to work with your child and give you those knowledge, skills, and choices that are necessary to be able to integrate much of the information that we're going to be training staff on. We're going to establish it in such a way we're only focusing on one self-care at the same time. We'll only integrate concepts that the child has actually mastered during treatment. But if you can begin to talk back and forth between between the levels of generalization and how they're going to benefit through it, and how we're going to use it in order to teach the child the skills that they need to learn while teaching for generalization at the same time. So you would say, okay, at level 1, we're going to focus on a self-care that you're having difficulty teaching your child, and break that down into small manageable steps and teach you the behavior principles that are necessary to get your child to be able to perform that skill. Meantime, we're going to be working on those aspects where we want, because again, their focus is only working on the topography of the skill, getting independence with the child being able to perform a series of actions without any prompting or eventually reinforcement. And in the meantime, we're going to break that down, because we're saying, well, he can't get dressed by himself, because when you say you need to get dressed for school, it requires a lot of different types of concepts for him to learn to be able to do that independently. So as we work in those concepts of locations, instruction following, object labeling, body parts, motor movements, all that's happening just in the area of getting dressed. You're going to be working on a self-care skill that you've been trying to get the child to do, such as brushing his teeth or combing his hair, so that you can begin to see how those behavior principles are effective for you. So I have found a lot of success in working with these charts and explaining to the parent how the intervention actually works for the child. That's how I would narrow down all that we're doing. And it's a constant reminder. So you don't just show them that chart one time when you say, okay, well, now that your child's been able to master the topography of getting dressed, we want to have him get dressed across different people. Like he should be able to get dressed with his father, with his grandparents. Maybe you have an older child that sometimes has to take care of the child when you're gone. But we always want to show how, through the levels of generalization, that it puts them in a situation where it's inclusive and not exclusive. And if we're able to do that on an ongoing basis, even when we have an update report, and I said one of the acronyms for the generality of parent training skills is you want to make sure that you go over the treatment goals and successes. You say, so here's where your child started, And he was, let me go to this. So here's the individual matrix that we focused on and level. Now this is for a high functioning kid, but still, this is what we worked on. This is their roadmap. Here's the new individual child matrix because we've updated his progress. These are the new skills that we are working with. And here's how it ties in with what you're going to be doing. So let's just say now, a lot of they've been in intervention for a year. The child is now in, we're teaching skills in the natural environment and in the social community or in their home, because all aspects of life include some type of social expectation. Then with the parent, you'll be focusing in levels 4 and 5, where they mediate generalization, they're shaping up behavioral cues. We're able to begin that process, because remember, a lot of what the parent wants that child to learn isn't reinforcing to the child, and a behavioral cus has to be shaped. And at some point, when that behavioral cus leads the child to be able to experience new contingency of reinforcement, new environments of learning, and it begins to be reinforcing to the child, only then can we call it a behavioral cus. So we want to then focus on levels 4 and 5 with the parent as we advance the child's program after the first year or second year. And again, what I don't want you saying to yourself is, well, you know, he's not as, his acquisition rate isn't as high as it should be or could be, or because his cognitive ability isn't advancing. It doesn't matter the functional level of the child. You can still teach for generalization in the natural environment and in the social community. It's just that how you do it and what you target is going to be different. But most important, how you teach it. So that's what I've narrowed down to.
A little bit on if there are any barriers, you know, specifically related to cultural or religious variables that may impact programming or may impact that building that trust.
So one of those, I'm going to stop sharing that for a second. Again, when we look at overall expectations of what a child needs to acquire, a lot of times when I'm working with different types of cultures where the child, they really don't expect anything for the child to do independently till they're like 5. It's important in that case conceptual process, you need to say, here's what we're going to be doing. Here's how we see the child's life, but you're going to help me create this home matrix or daily life matrix to tell me those things that you want to target. And it's up to the behavior consultant to be able to adapt to those requests. And at the same time, especially when it comes to behavior problems, what I ask parents is I'll say, okay, I know that's how you've been taught, or in your culture, this is how you deal with those behavior problems. Are you willing to set that aside? And we're going to be trying this intervention and we're going to be training you on that. And we just need your willingness to be able to come from more from a behavior analysis perspective so that we can work on that behavior problem, either whether we're management or we manage it or decrease it. And we want to refrain from making interpretations of what the behavior problem actually means for the child, but more about what does it actually look like? What do you want we want it to decrease or eliminate, and here's how we're going to go about doing it. But most important, a lot of times we get caught up in expecting families of other cultures to do things because we're coming from an American perspective. And depending on, because this is more crucial than anything, if the child is learning the skills in English, so English being their second language, and the family speaks a different language, you have to have that conversation with them because it's too confusing for the child. It doesn't mean that the parent can't speak to them in their native language, but when it comes to the actual targets that we're teaching that are being taught in English, those targets and behaviors are subject to those contingencies that are made up of the American culture. But second, if that child's going into a regular education situation or going into the public school system, that child has to be able to respond to those contingencies. And once a child can discriminate and be able to participate in intervention And when it comes to generalization, then we can start adding some of the things that they would expect in their home, where we're not competing with skill acquisition or concept acquisition. It's really more in the generalization process. So if you look at the levels of generalization, you would begin to show them that it's going to be in levels 4 and 5 that we begin to say, okay, now what other things are you expecting the child to respond to in your home environment, out in the community? And that's when we begin to address and teach for those other types of contingencies that we might have not addressed from an American culture perspective.
Involvement from parents. How would one address obstacles related to long work hours or parent unavailability? Are there standards for expected level of involvement, or does it vary on a case-by-case basis?
It does vary on a case-by-case basis, and I hate to be the one saying this, but it's going to depend on the funding source. So most of the funding sources that we have, which is obviously insurance, require that we have parent training goals. And one of the things we have to tell parents is that funding sources are not going to approve continued intervention unless they see some parent involvement. And it's better for them to work on one goal at a time. You are going to have to adjust based off of what they're able to, how much they can participate. So those are always more difficult to request. And I know that behavior analysts oftentimes, somehow there's an expectation that they're available 24/7, but it's a give and take process. And you say, for your child to really, for us to maximize the effectiveness of ABA treatment, we need for you to at least identify one day out of the week that you can be home at this time. Or maybe you can do a Zoom at this time, and every other week go out to the home and do hands-on. Or one day during the week, if they're at center, that they stay at the center 1 hour longer than what they typically would have in order to get that parent training session. But you have to be a behaviorist from this perspective. You don't want to reinforce the wrong behavior. You want to reinforce the right behavior. And there's a term that we use that a lot of times, might I think you have a different term, but it's called forced choice. So if you're always at the mercy of the parent saying, well, I can't do this and I can't do this, and I'm competing with this and I can't, you just have to narrow it down. You say, okay, I hear all that. So I'm going to give you two choices and I need for you to pick one. This is when I'm available. This is what I can offer you. And here are the two choices. All that's their stress, and that's chronic stress. That's how parents deal with that. And you got to acknowledge it. Wow, that is really a lot to take on. I completely get it. But my job here is to increase the quality of your child's life as your child interacts with you. And the only way I can do that is to get some level of give and take in this process. This is not about us providing all this for your child, because what good does that do if once we leave, the child can't perform anything when he's with you? You're going to sit back and go, well, ABA was a complete waste of my time. So you want to, again, shape that process, and the parent has to be reasonable and you have to be reasonable.
I will go over the next question with Brenda. How would you respond to a parent who is resistant to ABA due to more recent research showing the importance of connecting with the child to help them de-escalate, as opposed to separating from the child when he or she is in distress, specifically focusing on co-regulation instead of a timeout or planned ignoring?
Okay. So I need to ask a few questions. Is this after you've done an appropriate functional analysis? You've identified the functions of the behaviors. You have clear data showing what the antecedent consequences are to the behavior to be able to show the parent what the data is reflecting? Because that would need to happen first, even if you have to take the data yourself. So this is where I like to call situational behavior intervention. And you say, again, it's that willingness. And you say, okay, could we take one? Because remember that when you identify behavior problem, it's not just happening. It's happening across the day, but it's also not happening all the time. And you say, I would like an opportunity to work with this behavior problem specific to mealtime. Are you willing to have me train you on these behavior principles in order to reduce this behavior so that you can see actually how it works? And I'm going to be there, right there with you, implementing the same intervention to show you from a hands-on perspective the impact it's going to have on the child. Now, I'm not real familiar with co-regulation. Someone needs to define that a little bit more for me. My interpretation is that are you speaking to the child, while he's having a behavior problem to calm him down, because then you're having a difference in philosophy. So you have to rule out, because a lot of times, just because the child could benefit from ABA doesn't mean that the parents believe in the philosophy of ABA. And if you're having that kind of a conceptual conflict, that's where those conversations get difficult, but you have to be the one to say it. If they're not willing to at least make it situationally specific, where you can actually demonstrate where those behavior principles can be effective in this particular area, let's say it's a tantrum, and it's stressful for any parent to see their child be in distress. It's not even a choice. It's uncomfortable. So I get that. But sometimes ABA intervention is recommended and the parent doesn't even know what it is. Like, no one took the time to say, this is what it involves. This is what it's going to require of you. And the parents just told, well, we were told to get ABA intervention if we want our child to learn how to talk, or you need to get ABA intervention if you want to deal with these behavior problems, without no other information. So you have an obligation to explain what behavior analysis is, how it is that we focus on socially significant behavior change, what that process involves. And you say, and by the time I'm done explaining all that to you, if you still believe wholeheartedly that the way that you want to address these behaviors doesn't align with theoretically how we're going to go about doing this, let alone from a behavior intervention procedural perspective, I get it. And we may need to discuss whether this is the type of service that's appropriate for your child. And there are situations, and you know what a lot of parents do? Oh my God, you mean I don't have to do ABA? No, you don't have to do anything. It's your child. You know what you want for your child. I don't. But you have to be able to tell parents that authentically, without judgment. If it's very, very clear after everything I just said that there is a conceptual conflict with the intervention, we have a responsibility to tell that parent without judgment, wow, I totally get it. And this ABA intervention may not be appropriate for your child. Is that what you're trying to tell me? I'm perfectly okay with letting the funding source know that. That can't be your out, by the way. That can't always be your out. You can't say, okay, well, with every parent that gives me a really hard time, I'm going to tell them that we're having a conceptual conflict here or theoretical conflict here. That's not your go-to. That's when you explained everything in the manner that you need to, that you have had the opportunity to, if they're willing to show it from an intervention hands-on perspective. When you've done all those things and the parent is still resistant and they say, well, I'm not comfortable with that. I really believe my child's in distress. I don't want to do it. Then ABA is not what they want. But I don't want people to ever think that when we do ABA intervention, that we're treating their child like they're robotic or that they don't have any feelings. Yes, they have feelings and emotions, but you can cry and be sitting at the same time. And you can ignore the part where they're trying to get your attention while trying to keep the child calm. So oftentimes I work with parents in those situations. I'm side by side with them. And I said, look, your child, yes, he's upset, but I want you to notice how he's calming down and how it's decreasing. Until you show the parent what you're looking at versus what they're looking at, they have no other way of looking at that behavior in any other way, except their past experience. And they're afraid of that. That's their vulnerability. Your way of going, wow, I really get, it's really hard. but I want you to work with me for this 5 minutes. And I want you to say, he took a breath, he's quiet. And now we're going to shape that up. Once they see what you're seeing, I've oftentimes seen parents go, I totally did not understand what behavior analysis was. I think that I can do that. So you got to narrow it down to that 1 5-minute interval where you can, and that's the thing that's really powerful about the science of behavior analysis, is you could actually show behavior change in such a very, 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 very short period of time. And the parents have never really been shown that. And you're getting this opportunity to do it.
Yes. And another question kind of similar to that is, what are your thoughts on ensuring that skills teaching does not become aversive?
Okay, I need a little more explanation on that.
Um,
Like without behavior problems? Aversive to the parent, to the
Probably aversive.
practitioner?
I would assume aversive to the actual client.
To the child. Is that,
Yeah,
that's
to
an
the child.
interpretation?
Yeah, that's my
That's the interpretation.
but feel free, whoever's anonymous attendee that put this in there. So what are your thoughts on ensuring that skills teaching does not become aversive, meaning maybe related to just non-compliance or the kid not wanting?
Well, I can't ensure anything 100%, but here's one of the things, and this is why it's so important that you understand typical development. When people say to me, I go, so I'm going to take this to a typical child perspective. When parents say, oh, he's going through their terrible 2s, or he's going through their terrible 3s, I chalk it up to when they learned how to talk. And it's natural. It's part of the developmental process for kids to resist and tantrum.
Yep.
And maybe not, the length of time matters, the frequency, but just because your child has autism, it doesn't mean that typical kids don't go through the same experience. And as a parent, whether your child has autism or whether your child is typical, watching your child cry and scream and throw themselves on the floor is hard. But you can't isolate those behaviors just because the child is autistic. The second thing is that knowledge is power. And you want to be able to demonstrate to the parent that here's how we're going to address skills teaching. We're going to target one skill at a time, just to show them. See, once they can participate that and see that they're being effective with their child, even if the child is distressed. So it kind of goes back to my original example when I said, we're going to address this behavior problem situation. Let's pick one situation or one routine where you're having a problem with this particular behavior problem, and we're going to isolate it to just those environmental contingencies, or just during mealtime. Because if you say environmental contingencies, you might come across a little bit probably not as connecting with the parent, because you're speaking in terms that they're not used to. So in this particular case, also, you want to find out what they mean. So when I said, well, what do you mean by aversive? You want to find out if that's what you're perceiving, or that's what the parent is saying to you, without judgment. You want to say, okay, I really need to come to understand what you mean by aversive, because that can mean 100 things. And say, well, when he cries, and then prompt the parent. So you say, have you ever seen a typical child go through that? Yes. The difference is with a typical child is most parents use punishment. We're going home. And punishment means anything that follows a behavior and decreases its future probability. That's punishment. It's not corporal punishment. In terms of what the Webster Dictionary says. So it's more important that you find out what they mean by that, and then be able to address each of those aspects accordingly. And then again, back to that willingness. Are you willing for me to show you, either with a tutor or come to the center? Because I remember when I had to videotape some of the samples of how to use the principles of behavior analysis in conjunction with the generalization levels. I remember doing one particular video where we had to use extinction and hand over hand guidance while teaching the child just to sit. And the parent said, okay, I'll let you videotape my child, but I don't want her crying for very long. And that was really tough for her. So we had to say, okay, well, before I videotape her, let me demonstrate to you what we're going to be doing. And we had to show her, and the parents crying at the same time. So I'm not going to say for you as a behavior analyst, that's not going to be hard for you, but you have to be willing to demonstrate what you're asking that parent to do before you ask that parent to do something. You got to do it at the same time with it. I'm going to be there right there holding your hand just to show you that we can teach your child skill while they're crying at the same time. We're going to give them breaks, but it's called shaping. And we want to shape your child towards success. And in that process, I can't ensure that he won't cry because typical kids don't do that. And it's important that a lot of times when you are living with autism, it's hard to see, and especially if it's an only child, it's easier to demonstrate that if they have siblings, because you can say, do you remember when your daughter was this age and she had tantrums and this, and how did you deal with that? You want to, when you ask a parent, do you remember when your kid was 2, but they're now 10? That was eons ago. So you kind of have to remind them that they did go through that period of time, but they saw that successes with their child, and that just because their child with autism is demonstrating this type of distress, we can actually work with the child in the same way.
Yes. Okay, those are all the questions that we have in the Q&A. I don't know if anyone wants to put in any new questions. Let's see. The question just came up. How overt versus covert are you with those inventories with parents?
You mean sharing with them that I'm actually using them?
I assume, but why don't we look at the inventories and then maybe you
Okay.
can
So what I'm going to do, this will be helpful. Now, Maudie and I just created this. I want to make sure I have it. Here it is. Okay, before I share my screen. So your timing's perfect on whoever asked that question. Okay. All right, I'm going to share. And then I'm going to show you this. So Maudie and I were in the process of, we created a Likert scale for these inventories. So here's the generality inventory for the BCBA to fill out. My view is that you need to be transparent and you should never hide anything. Because the more that you're transparent, the more you can see how the parent is responding and get them to work with you. You never want them to not work with you. And these Likert scales were written up because not only are you going to rate yourself and how you implement the generality inventory, but you're going to have the parent rate you so that we have some inter-observer agreement. And then on the approachable, same thing. You say, so the generality inventory is being used to show you how I want to work with you. I want to have a genuine connection with you. I want to empower you. I'm going to have an opportunity to fill this out. You're going to have that. So that, because it's my checklist for me to say, am I accomplishing these things with you? Did I ensure learning occurs in the natural environment during the family's daily routines? So a lot of times, when it's just you and the parent, you really don't have feedback. And it's really difficult that if you don't like something, or if you don't think that the behavior analyst is doing their job, it's hard to say, well, you're not doing your job. This gives them permission and contains it in a way to, in my opinion, that it contains it in a way so it can't get completely out of control where the entire interaction is negative, but in a way that works towards remaining and connecting with the actual parents and family. Then when it comes to the approachable, when I say, so there's two things that you say to this parent, there's two things that I'm trying to accomplish during this parent training outside of the actual formal training that I'm going to give you in about behavior analysis and how it relates to skills teaching and dealing with behavior problems. The other one is, I know that your life right now has been turned upside down. Living with autism is very difficult. And you show them that book that I just showed you, Autism in the Family. And you say, this might be a helpful book for you to read. But information and all the studies show that parents of children with autism have a lot more stress, but the difference is that it's chronic, it's continuous throughout the developmental years of the child. So that makes your life, your interaction with your child not really approachable. So I want to also focus on helping shape how you see your life with your child with autism, how we can assist you in making that process more positive. So I'll be implementing aspects of this approachable inventory, and you just go over it. You don't show them, in the training, I broke that down and there was a lot of information on the approachable inventory. This is another way of just making it very concise and just say, we're not gonna, it's not like I have my notebook here and we're going to go through this, we're gonna first just work on alleviating societal norms. It's wherever you're at with your child when it comes to how chaotic things can feel. I'm going to be using this as a prompt to help you make that situation more approachable. And if you are transparent about it and they go, well, can I see it? Sure, they can see anything they want. I don't have anything to hide, because we shouldn't do that in general. And it really is about shaping a connecting relationship, because they're used to being so separated, or having professionals talk down to them or not include them. So even all that's really new for the parent, let alone managing and dealing with having a child with autism and how family members may deal with that. But there's a lot of judgment on a parent, his or herself, as well as judgment about how other kids are doing. So it's like the judgment jury never goes away. And this is a way of controlling for that and getting the parent to learn how to speak differently about that, and making it okay to ask for help, because in some cultures, it's not okay to ask for help. But, just to let you know this, even in the work environment, most people won't ask for help because asking for help is a weakness. So you get a general idea about where the parent is coming from and what you're competing with when it comes to actually training the behavior principles with respect to how to work with their child, if you're able to show these inventories at the same time, and that you're going to be asking them. So this is the one that the BCBA would fill out, and then the parent would fill this out on themselves. So we just launched this. We're getting an initial baseline, and we're going to be asking for all our staff to be filling this out at least 6 months into intervention, and then a year after intervention, and then finally when they exit.
And then speaking of exiting, we have a question that came through. So Brenda, regarding transitions, do you have advice on specific goals and practices to target for parents who are having trouble letting go of support level from ABA?
Okay. So that's a very, very, very good question. And one of the things you want to look for and I don't know what each of your positions are, but if you are a practitioner who's saying, I'm never going to be done with this family, you got to point the finger at yourself, because you've shaped that. And what I mean by that is, transition isn't about just saying goodbye to the family. When you look at the levels of generalization, and we begin to look at levels 4 and 5, teaching in the natural environment, bringing behaviors under social control, getting the child to be able to engage to the level that they can, that their behaviors are socially competent. For me, you begin the transition talking. One, at the beginning of assessment, just say, this is a short-term intervention. This means, even though it's intense, and your child may be getting anywhere between 25 and 40 hours a week. It's short term. It's intended to last 2 to 3 years. In the last year that we provide services, we will be talking about transition. And as we move through the levels of generalization, we're going to talk about transition. And here's what this means. This means that I'm not doing my job if I haven't trained you as a parent to be part of this process. And when we transition, it shouldn't be a big surprise. And when we end intervention, you'll know that you're ready. You won't like it. I mean, nobody likes change, but you'll accept it because that's what parenting's about. And if you look at parenting in general, we transition all the time. So we transition from the toddler preschool years to them going into school. That's a big transition. And then we transition to middle school, and then we transition to high school. And oh my God, now it's college and we've got to drop our kid off and you're bawling your head off for a month. All that's happening and we don't like, but we don't prevent our child from becoming independent. This is no different. It's just in a very much shorter period of time. And again, if I'm not having you be part of that transition process, then I am not doing my job, and it's not going to be a big giant surprise to you. So you should minimally be talking about what is expected of how the service is going to be implemented over a period of time in that process, especially within the aspects of case conceptualization that you're going to be leading. This will end. You will see how your child progresses. We will involve you in that transition process. And to my knowledge, again, this is not about liking it. This is accepting that this is how the phases of intervention work. And acceptance is everything. And this is ACT talks about that a lot. And so in a training that I'm going to be giving in January with ABA Technologies with respect to OBM from a leadership from an OBM perspective, I'm going to be talking a lot about ACT in that particular training series. But I've never had an issue with a parent reacting completely negative, because I'm not sure what that actually looks like. Again, they don't like it. They want you to stay there for a long time. But you know, with my company, we're known for transitioning cases. We don't keep cases forever. There's no such thing as forever. And the other thing that is a misconception is, yes, ABA is very effective in teaching skills to kids with autism, along with dealing with behavior problems and building repertoires. But it was never intended in the first place to be forever, whatever that means. And we have to show parents in that process that what we're asking them to do, or what we're doing, isn't any different in the way that you look at behavior in general, because Skinner was really smart. He based the behavior learning principles off of everyday behavior in the environments that there's nothing out there in the environment now with a typical kid or how you look at it. You can still look at when people say, I don't believe in reinforcement. Well, okay, reinforcement's happening whether you like it or not. We're talking about laws of behavior. And the more that we're able to make the science approachable for parents and integrate that transition process, as opposed to, I say this, and I mean this in the most positive way, you can't be at the mercy of parent concerns, because then you're not doing your job. If you're only there because saying yes to the parent because you don't like the uncomfortability. One of the thing when I did the Embracing Vulnerability series is you have to look at your vulnerability just as much as you're looking at the parents. And behavior gets shaped. And if the parent is having a hard time with the transition and doesn't want it, well, I don't accept it. Okay, I can maybe think of 2 cases that were like that in my lifetime as a practitioner, but for the most part, transitions were successful. And when they were not, it's because they were never talked about. They were never part of the process.
When you are talking about ACT and parent training and parent involvement, maybe you can talk a little bit about values and how you've incorporated values into just our, all of our programming.
Okay. So just say yes or no. Of the people who are attending, how many are familiar with ACT? Or
Yes,
had some
yes,
training?
yes, yes. Lots of yeses. Everyone's a yes.
All right. One of the things I want to make really clear about values, I first introduced ACT into my company, I think back in 2017. So I did it formally. And it's a lot because there's 6 core processes to talk about. And but the ones that are most useful in the workplace are values and committed action. And the barriers that most people work with when it comes to change is fusion. So we talk about being in the present moment and diffusing. And then one of the terms that is used when you're in that fusion process is that you're experiencing what we call experiential avoidance. So in situations that appear to be aversive, most people want to get rid of the aversion. They don't really want to do a different behavior to create a different relationship. They engage in behaviors to just make it go away. And the reason why that doesn't really serve you well is that you're not really being navigated by your values. And so one of the mistakes I did early on is that, a lot of my staff know this who might be attending this webinar, and that is that values don't come and go. Values are a part of you. You are navigated by those values. If one of your values is family, well, just because at your work, it doesn't mean that family's not important to you. So it's the context in which you allow your values to navigate you. If family is a value that you've identified, and one of the ways that you ensure that that happens is that you want to, you ensure that, especially if you have kids, that you talk to your kids, and that no matter what, how difficult it may be, you're going to leave that line of communication open. One of the committed actions you're going to make is to ensure that you communicate with your kids, that you communicate with your partner or your husband. When you come to work, you go, what does that have anything to do with work? Well, because you value family, you're open to connection and communication. That actually serves you greatly. The only distinction is that when you come to work, the context is different. And one of the reasons why I also then added Dare to Lead was that people get caught up in the words. And if the word is too intimidating, well, then I don't want to have anything to do with it. So we're not used to the terminologies, to any of the terminology of words that are used when it comes to vulnerability. We've shied away from it. We talk about private events. You keep your personal life out of your professional life, but we're saying these things to ourselves privately. And they do, at some level, dictate how we go about making behavior change. So you want to then, again, not remove the value. Well, that value doesn't have anything to do with me at work. Well, yeah, it does. How will you maintain that communication connection in this situation for which you are having to give feedback to this staff person who doesn't want to hear about it? You want to be able to then say, I want to talk to you that one of my values is connection and communication. You don't have to say one of my values is family. You can say my value in terms of what I want to accomplish is I want to maintain a connection. I want to be able to communicate with you and maintain a connection. Are you feeling that? And you get feedback. So it's important too that you ask the other person, what do you value about life? And how they can be part of that process. So one of the things that happened is when you look at a list of all the values that you could have and be governed by, love, balance, let's see, present moment, reliability, responsibility, faith, whatever it might be, there's creativity. There's hundreds of values, but you have to pick the value that you know that you can that's going to navigate in your life. So no matter what, it doesn't go away. And so we have to experiment with that. And one of the things that's really critical is that you don't pick your values based off of what you think people are going to like. You don't pick your values based off of, well, I don't like this one, but I like this one. And when you're picking your values, one of the things you want to ask yourself is, am I picking this value because this is something I want to be able to live my life by, but this is what I'm currently living my life by? And we're not willing to have those conversations. It's much easier to talk about a value because you like it. And it's much harder to say, is that value really working for you? And this is where committed action really, really matters. That value doesn't mean anything unless you can commit yourself to the actions that are necessary to be navigated by that value. And the form of the committed action based off the context of the situation is what changes. Where you then are, because every time you don't allow yourself to be navigated by your value, they call it cognitive dissonance. Or you can say experiential avoidance. You remove yourself from that value further and further and further till you can't even remember who you are, because you're too busy wanting other people to like you and not really displaying and engaging in that committed action. And if you can't engage in those committed actions, then you better question the value that you picked, because it may not have been a value that you really wanted. And one of the things that I ask people to do is, especially if it's something that's being done at work that is interfering with them being an effective practitioner or effective at whatever job that they have, I'll ask that, how long you've been doing that behavior? And they'll go, what? I said, so I told this person who's, in my opinion, acting arrogant, has anybody ever told you outside of work that you're arrogant? And no. I said, well, you might want to go ask them again. No behavior occurs in one place or wouldn't be in your repertoire. And it's important for you to acknowledge that, because it's not enough to see if you're navigated by your values just in the workplace, because that's all your employee or your supervisor sees. Are you living by your values in your home? That's how you get a balanced life. Does this value truly navigate me in all places? Will I slip up? Yeah. Brene Brown calls it slippery behaviors. But for the most part, you get back on track and you don't avoid those situations that are uncomfortable for you. So it takes some careful time. I mean, you need to be careful about what you pick. And then you start asking people, wow, this is a value that I've chosen. I've chosen communication. Do I communicate well? I mean, you want to get feedback from other people, because you have one opinion about yourself and other people have other opinions about yourself. And then you'll get an idea about how much you sabotage yourself. That doesn't allow you to live by that value or be guided by that value or move towards that value.
Yeah, and I do have a few items that I saw on the most recent survey.
Okay.
I can just read. Some of them aren't questions. They're more just, comments that maybe it'll get you to think of something else, and get the attendees to think of some additional questions. But one of them says, examples on how to manage parent ambivalence or dissonance during parent coaching sessions, parent training and transitioning out into the school setting, staff RBTs, and generalizing ABA procedures and strategies across different clients they work with. Some common problems that come up when targeting generalization with clients and families, and how to troubleshoot.
Okay, so do you want me to? That's a lot.
I know, yeah.
So,
you know what? Here, I can.
So which one do you want me to? Yeah, if you break it down to each question, was that all one question, or those were just comments?
So these were just a few comments I'd noticed people had sent in after the most recent webinar. So
okay.
I just wanted to share those with you in case there were any that you heard that you wanted to address now, but
Sure. I'll try to address them all. I'll just have to keep my answers shorter.
I know it's a lot. I'm sorry.
Oh, no, that's okay. They're important questions.
Mhm.
Can you see them, Brenda, if you pull up the chat?
There's one question up here that I wonder if you have any decision on how to sustain, maintain the parent bond because many have setbacks. Okay. Again, when you talk about setback, you have to say that to the parent. I noticed that we were working on learning the principles of reinforcement, or we were working on maintaining your child now knows how to dress himself, and we're working on maintaining that in his repertoire. But I've noticed now that you're starting to help him more. I'm just pretending right now. Or that the child, can you tell him what's going on? And when you talk about setback, remember that if you say, I notice that you're having a setback, that's judging the parent, because to the parent, they don't see it as a setback. And as parents, one of the things that's really critical is that parents be okay with what we use, and people are afraid to use this word because, oh my God, we can't use it, failing. I fail all the time, but you get yourself back up and you dust yourself off. And I can't think of anything more vulnerable than being a parent, whether the parent it's with a typical kid or a kid with autism. Parenting is hard. Oftentimes it's harder than work, because work can be easily become an escape, but parenting is a commitment to raising your children the best that you know how. And if there was a book out there that would say, here's how parenting is perfect, well, I want to see that book, because there's no such thing. So you say to the parent, we were making a lot of progress. I noticed some things with your child and some things that you're not doing anymore. Could you give me a reason why that's happening? And oftentimes you're going to go, we just had such a chaotic situation happen in the last 2 weeks. And I just couldn't remember what to do. And then you ask the parent, did you notice that when you did this, here's how your child acted? And have you noticed? So you get the parent to notice what you're noticing. And then say, so can we address that? It looks like you might need some help with some other strategies when you're on vacation, when something happens in a family that was unexpected, that will help you maintain the progress that we've made with your child. Now, with kids with autism, their setbacks might be greater. So you have to be willing to talk to the parent and say, I just want to remind you that, yes, I know that. So now you've expressed to me that all this is happening, but with your child, this is the impact it really had on them. So I would like to begin the process of building that back up and helping you be able to work with your child in a way that we can get him back to where he was before. So it does matter on your choice of words when you're working with them. When it comes to, because acknowledgement is everything, they need to see the situation the same way that you see it. And you as the practitioner have to do that without judgment. When it comes to, well, for me, generalization's happening all the time. We always have to generalize from one situation to the next. And the best way to work with it is that you have to have the target behavior, skill, repertoire, however you define the target behavior and all the responses it includes. You want to be able to know that in every new situation that you're going to. So I have those level 4 generalization planning sheets and level 5 generalization planning sheets that allow you to identify the controlling variables, the reinforcement schedule, the class of behaviors that are necessary. If you fill those out based off the new setting that the child is going into, that will allow you to better plan and prepare for the type of generalization that needs to be maintained in those environments. If you go into those environments or with those individuals without any plan of the contingencies that you're going to be looking at, the controlling variables that must come to maintain the behaviors, then it's like the hope and train. It's like train and hope. So you don't want to do that. You have to plan and know what that child is going to, so that you can identify the variables that the child must respond to, or that you must have in place, and the contingencies that the child is responding to. And if the child is not responding to those contingencies in those new environments, those are the variables that you need to change in the environment in order to bring those behaviors under control in those new environments. So it's important that, like, let's say if they're going into a classroom, I want to know ahead of time what's expected of the child. What does he need to respond to? What does the teacher currently do when a child isn't following the rules? And a lot of times, consultants aren't even aware of what the classroom rules are. So don't ever go into any new situation not planning ahead of what is expected of the child when it comes to generalization. On the parent ambivalence and dissonance during parent coaching sessions, hands-on tells you everything. So you can be having a lesson with them, and you can see that most of us, if we're paying attention to who's in front of us, knows when we've lost a parent, knows when we've lost the learner, knows when the staff person is looking the other way. I just say it and said, you know what? I've lost the connection with you. I see it. Did you notice that? And most people are willing to admit, you say, you know what? I'm going to set this aside. I've had this happen right in the middle of intervention. I'll just set aside whatever it is I'm trying to train them on. I said, let's just do it right now. And a lot of times, if you do it in action and you're able to, the exact thing that you're training them on, you're able to do it in action and identify in action those things that you're training them on, you're going to get a better response. And the ambivalence goes away. So I've just gained a lot of connection with the parent when I'm willing to work through that ambivalence with them.
Impressive. You got through those questions.
Yes. Thank you, Brenda.
Okay, no problem.
And I know we're almost at an hour and a half. Is there anything else you wanted to touch on before we end? I guess that was everything. And you said you saw one earlier in the chat, right? But you addressed that one.
Yeah, she got that one.
Okay. All right. Well, thanks so much, everyone, for all of your questions. And thank you, Madi and Brenda, for taking the time to do this.
Yeah, we're going to be coming up with some companion books to go with the R.E.A.L model. One is on is going to be a curriculum guide for teaching for generalization. Another one will be, and again, I didn't have time in the continuing series with ABA technologies to go into lesson progression, so lesson planning and progression. So that is something that we're Madi and I again are developing. I want to do it. Usually when I do that training, that's like a 7-hour workshop. So I'm learning how to break these down. And for anybody who has interest in using the R.E.A.L model for lesson development progression, just let us know that. For those of you who, again, ABA Technologies is putting on a training series for leadership from an OBM perspective, which I highly encourage for you to attend. I'll be doing one of the presentations, and that series starts in January.
In January, yes. Yeah, we'll be advertising it within the next week or two. So, yeah. And
then I'll end on this. For those of you who are thinking about or haven't taken the continuing ed unit course, again, it's 23.5 hours. You get your ethics and your supervision. I would encourage you to take that. There's so much to teaching for generalization within ABA treatment because it's over a period of time that we spend a lot of time on that training series with videos in place, because you can say a lot and write a lot and you can kind of get lost while you're reading it until you actually see it in action. And so I show a lot of video samples of how to implement the different levels of generalization with various kids and how to identify those targets. We've got some feedback from our staff. I know the book is very complex. I know there's a lot of information, but that continuing ed series really does tie it all together to say, okay, you know what, this is doable. I can do this. And last, I want to end on this. That book, yes, you could read it from the beginning to the end. I made my staff do that just because I wanted to get some feedback from them. It took them a couple of months, but it's not that kind of book where, oh, I'm going to read the whole thing and now I can go teach for generalization. One of the things you might want to be thinking about, just as follow-up questions to Monty and myself, is the different ways to use that book. We're going to be coming up with something to guide individuals who are interested in the R.E.A.L model on how to use the book as a practitioner. I wrote that from a practitioner perspective because I myself was a practitioner. It's delineated in that way, and this would be for any new practitioner picking up that book. So if you have questions about how to use the book, how to break it down, and what areas of generalization that you would like more training on in terms of the use of the book or the continuing ed course, feel free to ask us.